The Pentagon has failed its financial audit for the 8th year in a row. Despite controlling nearly $4.65 trillion in assets, the Department of Defense once again could not fully account for where its money, equipment, and resources go.
For the 8th consecutive year, the United States Department of Defense failed its own financial audit while overseeing records that include $4.7 trillion in untraceable accounting adjustments, 8 years in a row. In any other context, this would trigger resignations, investigations, shareholder revolts, or criminal probes. Here, it passed almost quietly, absorbed into the background noise of budget negotiations and geopolitical headlines. Another failure, another promise of improvement, another year where the books still did not add up.
The DoD has never successfully passed an audit.
Come on, never?
Never. There we go.
The stuff that they lose in the couch cushions is like $20-30 billion a year. They just don't know where it went. It's gone.
The scale of what we're talking about is difficult to grasp because it exists far outside normal human experience. The Pentagon oversees assets and liabilities measured in the trillions: aircraft carriers, fighter jets, weapons systems, bases scattered across the globe, inventories accumulated over decades, some of it dating back to the Cold War. Auditors reviewing these records have repeatedly stated a simple, unsettling fact. They cannot fully trace where everything is, how it is valued, or how it is accounted for. Within the audit documentation itself appears a figure of $4.7 trillion. It did not originate from a leak, a whistleblower, or speculative reporting. It comes from accounting adjustments recorded to reconcile financial systems that do not align. These entries allow totals to balance even when underlying records cannot be fully matched. On paper, the numbers resolve. In practice, the supporting trail cannot be fully traced. It's important to understand what makes this so disturbing. This is not about a single missing transaction or a clerical error. These are systemic blind spots, decades of fragmented financial systems that don't communicate with each other, property records that exist in one database but not another, assets listed without precise locations, equipment counted but not physically verified, values assigned based on outdated assumptions. Auditors didn't accuse the Pentagon of theft. They said something more alarming. They can't prove where the money went or what it turned into. For most people, an audit is a mundane thing, something that happens to corporations, nonprofits, or small businesses to ensure honesty and accuracy. But audits exist for a reason. They are the basic mechanism of trust in any system that handles money at scale. When an institution fails an audit once, it raises eyebrows. When it fails twice, concerns grow. When it fails 8 times in a row, the problem is no longer technical, it is institutional. Auditors identified 26 major accounting weaknesses across the Department of Defense. That phrase sounds technical, almost harmless, until you translate it into plain language. These are areas where controls are so weak that records cannot be relied upon, areas where verification breaks down, areas where no auditor can confidently say, yes, this is accurate. In corporate America, even a handful of such weaknesses would be catastrophic. Here, they have become routine. What makes this even more unsettling is how normalized it has become. Each year, officials acknowledge the failure, emphasize progress, and set a new future target date for passing. 2027, 2028, always a few years away. Meanwhile, the defense budget continues to grow. More funding, more programs, more complexity layered on top of systems that still can't account for what already exists. The disconnect is striking. Ordinary Americans are audited aggressively for minor discrepancies. Small business owners are expected to justify every deduction. Welfare recipients are monitored, reviewed, and sometimes penalized over tiny sums. Corporations face fines for misreporting revenue or misstating assets. Yet the institution responsible for the largest discretionary budget in the federal government repeatedly fails basic financial verification, and nothing fundamentally changes. This isn't because no one knows. These audit failures are public, reported, acknowledged. They appear in government releases and mainstream news coverage, but they are buried under language designed to soften their impact. Complexity, scale, legacy systems. All of it true, none of it reassuring. Complexity does not excuse opacity. Scale does not eliminate accountability. Legacy systems do not justify perpetual failure. If anything, the size and power of the institution demand higher standards, not lower ones. And yet, the standards appear to bend as the numbers grow. Defenders of the Pentagon argue that this is not a story about missing money, and technically they are correct. Auditors have not said trillions were stolen. They have said they cannot be traced. That distinction matters legally, but emotionally it may matter even more. Money that cannot be traced is money that cannot be trusted, and trust is the foundation of democratic oversight. There is also a political reality that quietly sustains this situation. Defense spending touches every congressional district. Jobs, contracts, suppliers, and infrastructure are spread strategically across the country. Questioning the Pentagon's budget is often framed as questioning national security itself. Accountability becomes politically dangerous. Scrutiny fades, the audits fail again. Meanwhile, official statements emphasize progress in percentages. A few more sub-agencies pass, a few systems are modernized, a few controls are tightened, but the department-wide verdict remains unchanged: fail. It's worth pausing on just how abnormal this situation is when placed against any comparable standard of accountability. In the private sector, audit failure is not an inconvenience or a talking point. It is an existential threat. A company managing even a fraction of these sums would face immediate consequences: frozen credit, collapsing share prices, regulatory intervention, and leadership removals.
Repeated failures would not be tolerated, explained away, or postponed into some distant future milestone. Investors would demand answers. Regulators would impose penalties. Operations would grind to a halt until the books could be verified. That framework exists precisely because scale without accountability is considered dangerous. And yet, the United States Department of Defense operates entirely outside that logic. It fails audits repeatedly, acknowledges the failure openly, and continues to receive increased funding with no interruption. What would end any private corporation instead appears to be treated as a manageable inconvenience here. This cycle has also been normalized through language. Each audit failure is paired with assurances of progress, measured not in outcomes but in effort. More systems reviewed, more offices partially compliant, more subcomponents passing individual tests. These incremental gains are presented as evidence that the overall failure is acceptable, even expected. But incremental improvement does not change the fundamental reality that the department as a whole still cannot produce a complete, verifiable picture of its finances. The scale of operations becomes a shield, not a responsibility. The roots of this problem stretch back far beyond recent headlines. Watchdog agencies, inspectors general, and government accountability offices have been flagging serious financial management deficiencies for decades. Long before full audits were even attempted, reports warned that records were fragmented, outdated, and often unreliable. Entire asset categories were poorly tracked, inventory systems were incomplete, property records lacked consistency. These were not isolated warnings, and they were not ignored out of ignorance. They were acknowledged, studied, and deferred. Each generation of leadership inherited the same underlying weaknesses and attempted to fix them without fully dismantling what came before. New systems were layered on top of old ones. Temporary workarounds became permanent solutions. Software designed for earlier conflicts was repurposed rather than replaced. The result was not a clean slate, but a dense web of interconnected systems that became harder to unwind with every passing year. Complexity stopped being a challenge to solve and became a justification for delay. As the systems aged and diverged further, the reliance on accounting adjustments increased. These adjustments are not inherently illegal or secretive, but their scale and frequency matter. They exist to reconcile discrepancies when records do not align, allowing reports to be finalized even when underlying data cannot be fully verified. In moderation, this is a technical tool. At scale, it becomes a structural crutch. Numbers that balance totals without resolving inconsistencies. Figures that close gaps on paper while leaving real-world uncertainty intact. The financial statements technically function, but the clarity they are meant to provide is diluted. For taxpayers, this creates a quiet but deeply consequential dilemma. They are asked to fund an institution whose financial records cannot be fully validated. They are told the spending is essential, urgent, and inseparable from national security. Questioning it is often framed as irresponsible or naive. Yet the same institution cannot meet the most basic standard required of any organization entrusted with public money: the ability to clearly account for what it has and how it is used. This tension is not about opposing defense or dismissing real global threats. It is about standards, about whether accountability scales upward with power or dissolves beneath it, about why scrutiny intensifies the closer it gets to ordinary citizens and weakens as it approaches the largest budgets and most entrenched institutions. The rules exist, but their enforcement appears uneven. The expectations are clear, but their application is selective. What allows this situation to persist is not explosive outrage, but exhaustion. The numbers involved are so large they lose emotional meaning. Trillions blur into abstraction. Repeated failures lose their ability to shock. The explanations grow increasingly technical, pushing the issue out of reach for most people. Fatigue replaces anger, confusion replaces scrutiny, and over time, silence becomes easier than engagement. Yet the unresolved question remains, year after year, embedded in official records and acknowledged in formal reports. How can an institution entrusted with trillions of dollars, operating under the banner of public safety and national defense, remain unable to fully explain where its resources are and how they are accounted for? How long can confidence survive without transparency? At what point does complexity stop being an explanation and start becoming a liability? The Pentagon continues to insist it is moving toward a clean audit. Auditors confirm that progress exists in parts of the system. Lawmakers acknowledge the issue and move on to the next funding bill. The pattern repeats, and the $4.7 trillion figure remains exactly what it has always been. Not proof of theft, not confirmation of loss, but a massive, unresolved question sitting quietly inside official financial records. In the end, this is not a matter of spreadsheets or accounting terminology. It is a matter of trust, of whether transparency is optional when power reaches a certain scale, of what it means when the most powerful institution in the world cannot meet the most basic standard demanded of everyone else. Until that question is answered, every new dollar approved carries a silent uncertainty behind it, not because anyone knows it is gone, but because no one can say with certainty where it truly ends up.